But first on BBC One Northern Ireland, and a few minutes later than billed in some listings, Julian O'Neill reports on the Belfast-Cork air crash for this week's Spotlight.
People's lives were second by second getting closer to ending.
They call it in our part of the country here pea soup. Just a blanket of fog in the airport.
The runway was just there, and we were going too fast, and I shouted out, "We're going to crash, we're going to crash."
Tonight on Spotlight, the worst air accident on the island of Ireland for more than 40 years. 6 people died, 6 were injured, most of them from Northern Ireland. A simple case of pilot error or an accident waiting to happen. February the 10th, a Manx 2 flight to Cork was departing Belfast City on its daily service around 8 a.m. We've reconstructed the journey using footage of the actual plane filmed before the day of the crash and images from similar aircraft flying to Cork and Belfast. On board were 10 passengers and 2 crew. An hour after takeoff, the plane made 2 failed attempts to land in heavy fog and circled Cork for 20 minutes, hoping the weather would clear. At the controls was Andrew Cantle, a rookie co-pilot with just 17 hours flying experience on this type of aircraft.
I mean, those last 20 minutes must have been terrible. You know, to just have nothing, to be flying into the wilderness, and you know that it's not like you can get off and walk away. I mean, you're on an aeroplane, and not only that, you've got passengers on board. To be put in that situation must have been terrifying for him.
Just before 10 a.m, the plane made a third fateful attempt to touch down.
It was as foggy as ever I seen, and whenever I looked out the window and seen the ground that close to me, and it was grass that I seen at that stage, I knew it just wasn't right.
We came through the cloud, and it turned out to be fog, and the runway was just there. It was, like I say, 30 feet, probably no more than that, and we were over to one side. And I think at that moment I just thought, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe I'm going to be in a plane crash. I
immediately just grabbed into the seat in front of me, and at the same time as that happened, you heard the plane, the revs coming up again to try and take off, and the plane then it tilted to the right-hand side.
I had no chance to brace, no chance to see or really think about anything. It happened so very, very quickly. The plane flipped, the windows all smashed, mud and water and everything just sort of came flying into the plane.
Rescuers said the survival of Lorne man Lawrence Wilson was a miracle.
I'm describing it as if it's happening slow, but it was just over like that. I could feel a great big bang, and at the same time I was just engulfed in mud because the plane must have dug into the mud of the ground beside the airport. And whenever I say mud, I mean really guttery, like water and stuff like that. And whenever that was happening, the fuselage, it started to come in. I was upside down at the stage, didn't know, but the fuselage had pushed my head down forward into the chair in front of me, and it was back here. And this leg was out in the aisle. It got caught with the mud and pulled away back. So whenever I come around, I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything. I was just engulfed in mud from my belt to my head, upside down.
Mark Dickens, a business manager from Kent, spent 40 minutes trapped in the wreckage, but his worst moments came immediately after impact.
I thought, okay, I'm alive, but then water started to come in, and I thought, are we in a lake or a river? Am I going to drown? But then the water stopped rising, and then someone said, we're on fire, and I could smell aviation fuel, and I could smell smoke, and I thought, I thought, but now we're going to catch fire and I'm going to die in a burning plane. So I was really scared that I was going to die at that point.
The front of the 19-seat aircraft, a Fairchild Metroliner, took most of the impact. Dead in the wreckage were the crew, Jordi Lopez and Andrew Cantle, and 4 passengers, Richard Noble, Brendan McAleese, Michael Evans and Pat Cullinan. The injured ranged from the walking wounded to the seriously hurt. Brendan Mallon sat not far behind the crushed cockpit. He had more than a dozen broken bones, including one in his neck that was millimetres away from killing or paralysing him.
Hopefully everything will heal. I will have some of the metal work that was put into my leg and neck. That's going to be there for life. My consultants say it could be 6 to 9 months before they're absolutely sure if everything is healed 100%.
It was Manx 2's first serious incident. The day it happened, chairman and majority shareholder Noel Hayes appeared before the cameras.
I've been in the aviation industry for 10 years. Our company flies 10,000 flights a year, and I can honestly say this is the worst day of my aviation career and the worst day of my life, I think.
So what went wrong on Manx 2 flight NM7100? Why did the plane try 3 landings and not divert? And why were a new captain and an inexperienced co-pilot put in such a difficult position? Regular flyer Mark Dickens was one of the first to board the plane and saw something he had never seen before.
I remember a guy in a fluorescent jacket was taking the suitcases on, and then he came and got us, and we took us across the tarmac and onto the plane. We all sat down. The guy in the fluorescent jacket then, who'd been loading the baggage, came into the plane, shut the door and started to do the safety brief, which was the usual seat belts and oxygen masks, etc. And then he took his fluorescent coat off and got into the pilot's seat.
That person was 27-year-old Andrew Cantle from York. He'd only been in the job 2.5 weeks, and most of it had been flying mail freight during the night.
If Andrew had died of natural causes, then you probably would have put all of this in a box, and obviously it would have come under memories, and that would have been it. But in this particular case, the more you hear, the more you think, you feel sorry for your son.
Andrew Cantle had long dreamed of a career as a pilot. After university, he obtained a commercial licence from flying school, but his first start was not what he expected.
He was doing an awful lot of other work that didn't consist of flying, putting seats in and out of aircraft, moving aircraft from A to B, putting luggage on aircraft, that type of thing, which had really diminished what he thought was going to be a big... The big lump of his job was actually not flying, it was doing other things. Certainly, as far as Andrew's partner is concerned, Beth, she said to me that Andrew had complained of having 3 or 4 hours sleep a night because he was doing these other things on the aircraft other than flying.
The other crew member was Jordi Lopez from Spain. He had just been promoted to captain, and this was one of his first flights in command. Jim Morris is a former RAF pilot. Now he's a solicitor representing Andrew Cantle's family. He feels crewing was a serious issue.
This is a completely avoidable accident. If you have a very junior co-pilot or newly qualified co-pilot, it is, in terms of flight safety, it's prudent to roster him or her with an experienced captain and vice versa.
But here it was the exact opposite. Not only that, but the pilots found themselves in an aircraft badly equipped for the thick fog. I've come to meet Captain Garrett Lyons just outside Dublin Airport. He's an experienced pilot. We're going to recreate a landing in fog at Cork Airport aboard a flight simulator.
Okay, so this is us coming in to Cork in poor visibility fog. We can see absolutely nothing.
The Metroliner's cockpit had no autopilot or flight director, computerized instruments which would have helped a difficult flight and landing. That made it even more important for the pilots to take care in their approach.
So I'm just going to freeze our position.
200.
So, as you just heard, our ground proximity warning system enunciate 200 feet. This is our decision altitude.
Decision altitude is the point where the pilots should commit to landing or pull out. But for some unexplained reason, on the Cork flight they went below that height 3 times and then changed their minds. It's the captain's call. The plane should only go below 200 feet if he feels it's safe to land.
We would have a sort of a challenge and response call between the captain and the first officer. And basically the first officer would ask the captain to decide. If you have adequate visual reference to continue, you continue. If you don't, you go around. Okay. It's quite black and white, quite straightforward.
50, 30, 20.
But for some reason this didn't work at Cork, with the outcome of the pilot's final attempt so tragically different from my simulated landing.
We don't know why these two guys were put together in the first place. We don't know, and we may never know, why they went below 200 feet. But what we do know is that there's a lot of questions to answer which don't have answers.
Another big question is why they attempted a third landing, when pilots' associations tell us most airlines would divert to another airport after 2 missed approaches. They had been told by the control tower that Kerry Airport was clear of fog, and they had enough fuel to make it. But once again, they tried to land.
They were faced with a tricky landing. They were faced with a very inexperienced first officer co-pilot in the right-hand seat, who obviously had very, very little experience of landing in fog. They had chosen not to divert. You know, just they were the 2 big things. Why was the co-pilot flying, and why had they chosen not to divert? But the decision to go a third time and the decision not to divert, that is the most baffling thing of all.
Crash investigators issued a preliminary report in March, by which time Manx 2 had stopped the Cork route. Captain Evan Cullen flies for Aer Lingus. He's also the president of the Irish Airline Pilots Association and has read the report with interest.
You could argue that the interim report does point the finger at pilot error. Is that fair, do you think?
Absolutely not. That is unfair. Every accident, every serious incident, there is what's called an error chain. And that takes anything up to 9 mistakes have to be made. And normally the first mistake is normally made in the boardroom, where a decision is made to buy an aircraft that's not properly equipped. And then it works all the way down to the pilot error. But at any time during that error chain, if somebody were to come along and just identify a risk and eliminate that risk, then that error chain is eliminated. It's very important to recognise that if we simply blame the pilots, this accident will happen again. Whereas if we don't eliminate the systemic errors that put 2 inexperienced pilots in an ill-equipped aircraft, if we don't correct that, then it will happen again.
What risks would you have identified on this particular flight even before takeoff?
First of all, the aircraft was not properly equipped to conduct this flight in the weather conditions that it was conducted in. And that was as plain to anybody at the start of the day before that aircraft ever departed.
What was left of the 19-year-old plane was taken to an army camp north of Dublin, where air accident investigators continue to go about their work. The wreckage is inside an old hangar, and the soldiers tell us that not even they're allowed inside the hangar, and we're certainly not being allowed inside to do any filming. The interim accident report found no mechanical problems with the Metroliner, and it pointed out that the direction of this investigation will now be heading off to look at wider issues and not just what happened on the day. In other words, who was in charge of ensuring that the Manx 2 flight met all the regulations? including those for safety. There's a good reason to ask this, because we can reveal that the authorities had already uncovered a problem with another plane Manx 2 was flying to Cork. That happened less than a month before the crash during a routine inspection carried out by the Irish Aviation Authority as part of a European safety programme. They won't say publicly what they found, but the European Commission tells us that inspection raised operational concerns. The inspection, which took place on January the 13th in Cork, involved this aircraft, a second Metroliner used on the Belfast route. The results haven't been released, but we've been told one of the problems was that maps being carried by the crew were out of date.
So just who was responsible for overseeing safety? Not just making sure a crew had correct maps, but ensuring the rules of the skies were followed. You might expect it to be Manx 2, which set up the Cork route in 2010 and whose name is on the side of planes.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board this Manx2.com flight.
But here's the problem. Manx 2 is not a real airline. It's only a ticket seller which contracts out its flights.
Experts like this former Ryanair executive call it a virtual airline.
I think this is the nature of the difficulty that the industry would have with this type of operation. It purports to be an airline in the way its check-in desks are laid out. It sells tickets with Manx 2 on them, but it isn't actually an airline itself.
Our chairman, Noel Hayes, takes a personal interest in every aspect of our service.
Noel Hayes is the face of Manx 2. The former city stockbroker owns 90% of the Isle of Man company he started in 2006. Before the crash, Manx 2 liked to call itself an airline in media and marketing material. It even issued a press release, proudly stating how it was able to operate in fog during one particular weekend on the Isle of Man in 2008.
To issue a press release saying that you landed in weather conditions that other airlines didn't is just simply irresponsible. To boast that you'll have a go when others diverted and use that as somehow a means of gaining positive publicity, I just find completely bizarre.
Manx 2's response to the crash was equally strange, according to this aviation lawyer representing most of the passengers. Having said it was their first priority to help survivors and the bereaved, Manx 2 then said it wasn't up to them to compensate the families.
I've been involved in kind of air crashes and resolving for 20 years, and this is the first time I have seen an an operation respond in the manner in which it did, which was a very early, we're sorry, we're going to support you, and then 3 or 4 days later, sorry, this is not our problem, it's all someone else's. And then almost a bunker mentality.
This is a letter from Manx 2's lawyers. It says that the plane was hired from a company, Líneas Aéreas de Andalucía, or Irlada, and it says responsibility for the crash lies in Spain. This is where Irlada is based. Last month, Spain was singled out by the European Commission for the number of safety deficiencies found in Spanish air carriers. Irlada was set up here in Seville almost 7 years ago. Curiously, its website has disappeared since the crash, and I've spent weeks trying to make contact by telephone and email, but with no response. It's time to track them down.
Using company's house documents, we've traced the registered address of Irlada here to a residential suburb of Seville.
And here it is, the official listed headquarters of a company whose plane crashed with the loss of 6 lives. I've traced the Belfast to Cork flight to a corner house. I buzz the gate and hope to finally get hold of someone from Irlada.
A mother and son came to the gate and they explained that they used to have an involvement with the company, but that ceased in 2007, and they said that they should have changed the registered company address, but they haven't.
They gave us the name and address of another individual here in Seville who they say that we should direct our inquiries about Irlada to.
The new address I'm given is just around the corner at an apartment block. Could this be where Irlada operates from?
Well, unfortunately, another dead end. The person we're looking for is not at home. We spoke to his wife. She says he works 70 kilometres from here. He won't be home until the weekend. She did take our contact details and said that she would pass them on.
I never did get a call, and Irlada have yet to make any public comment on the crash, which, remember, killed 4 passengers and 2 of their employees, co-pilot Andrew Cantle and Spanish captain Jordi Lopez. But I have learned one crucial fact. Irlada is no more a commercial airline than Manx 2. As we know, it was Manx 2 which set up the route and sold tickets on its website. It provided the passengers. Irlada, who we can't now trace, supplied the planes and crew to fly the route. And then there was a third company, Flightline BCN, also based in Spain. They provided the essential legal clearance for the Cork operation, what's known as an AOC, short for Air Operator Certificate. The AOC is the critical legal requirement for running an airline. Neither Manx 2 nor Irlada have one. Getting one is arduous and expensive. You need to show you can properly train crews, maintain planes and generally organise an airline. This is the flying school near Barcelona where Jordi Lopez, the captain of the crashed plane, did his training. I've come here to look for Flightline BCN, the company that gave Manx 2 and Irlada the legal cover to fly to Cork. And it's here that we get the first glimpse of the company on the side of this disused Metroliner, just like the one which crashed in February. Later we find their office, located in the sprawl surrounding Barcelona's main airport. We understand Irish investigators have asked them almost 50 questions arising out of the accident. The company's solicitor has agreed to meet me at a Barcelona hotel. He argues they were not to blame for the crash and claims Flightline had not even heard of Manx 2 until the accident.
Are Flightline saying that they are in no way responsible for the Cork crash?
No blame. Flightline has no responsibility for the accident because the pilots who were under the responsibility of Irlada, there's a contract between Flightline and Irlada which says that the responsibility for the pilots was Irlada's. So therefore, Flightline has no responsibility whatsoever. We don't know what was the reason for the accident or what happened, but Flightline doesn't have any responsibility for it, not directly or indirectly.
But legally, Flightline operated the Cork flight.
Careful, this is important. Flightline didn't operate the plane, simply it had the administrative title of the document that Irlada used to operate the plane. This is very important, this nuance.
But the European Commission says that's not right. They tell us the regulations are clear. As the holder of the to answer our questions. Instead, we got a statement saying the crash investigation has Manx 2's full cooperation. The statement added, Manx 2 regards speculation or other attempts to prejudge the issues as inappropriate and liable to mislead, and accordingly will not be providing any comment until after such time as the final report is published. Manx 2 stopped using Flightline after the Cork accident.
So a flight from Northern Ireland to Cork, ostensibly run from the Isle of Man, was using planes from Seville under the licence of a company from Barcelona. None of it is against regulations and it's not unusual in world aviation. But some industry experts now think this type of arrangement leaves too many gaps in control over safety.
Manx 2 is operating completely legally. It's not breaking the law in any way. So if I were to criticise anything about this setup, it's the fact that the system allows it to exist and does not make it illegal.
But does that free Manx 2 from all responsibility?
There isn't any evidence at this point as to whether or not Manx knew what it was getting. It is responsible, not just for hiring an operator, but for hiring an operator which it has tested and found good enough. The inquiry will determine whether it did that.
What strikes you particularly about the kind of operation that Manx 2 were running?
But everything about this operation says low cost, low cost, low cost.
Would they not argue that this was the only way that they could run this route and make it viable?
That may be true, but is it viable now? You see, if you think safety is expensive, try an accident. To be honest with you, I do not know what the legal relationship and the contractual relationship was between Manx 2 and Flightline, and indeed the aircraft provider, but there is clearly a problem if there is no identifiable line of responsibility or authority.
The final report we won't see or know the conclusions of for about another year, but at this stage, what do you think they should be looking at, or possibly even concluding?
I would urge that the AAIU, the Air Accident Investigation Unit in Ireland, closely examines all of the relationships between the three companies, the three entities that came together to produce this flight. It's absolutely imperative that we make sure that there's no gaps in the regulatory framework which could give rise to this again.
For families scarred by the Cork crash like Brendan Mallon's, next year's accident report holds out the hope of answers to what went wrong.
As far as my memory is concerned, I was sitting reading a book on an aircraft, going to do a day's work, as I have done many, many times before. But while that was going on, people's lives were second by second getting closer to changing, ending. While I was just sitting reading a book, this was all just seconds from happening.
I'm certainly looking for answers. I think there doesn't appear to be anything technically wrong with the plane from the initial report, which suggests then that it's an entirely avoidable accident. There are a number of people who lost their lives, both pilots as well, unfortunately, lost their lives, and a number of us were injured. So yes, I want answers. Am I looking to blame anybody? Not necessarily, but certainly I think that we all deserve some answers as to what happened on that day and why those decisions were made.
Lawrence Wilson's life is getting back to normal. He walked away with only a scratch, but the trauma still remains.
Surviving the accident was bad, but it was, I get through it. But whenever you go to the funerals and you're seeing a coffin being brought into a chapel there and the widow coming and the youngsters crying behind it, it's like living your own funeral. You just sitting and looking and thinking, that could be me, that could be my wife and my kids walking behind the coffin. That's the bit that's really, really hard.
Andrew Cantle had been a part-time lifeboat man, helping in 66 rescues off the coast of his home city, Sunderland. His father, John, says he knew the value of life and was a responsible young pilot.
The situation here is simply that if what we believe and what we think was going on was putting people's life at danger, putting pilots' life at danger, and the more we keep hearing, the more it is like that. If we can at some point say, right, this ain't going to happen in the future, because what we're going to do is put legislation in that says that you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do the other. That is it. I mean, Andrew will get that on his headstone.